welcome to the Switch for Good podcast. I'm Alexandra Paul with my wonderful co-host, Dotsie Vaush. Hi, Dotsie.
Good morning.
Oh, you're
good afternoon and good night, whatever time you're going to be listening to this.
That's right. You're very chipper today. You've been traveling, though, and with one of the plant-based community's heroines.
Yes.
Miyoko.
Yeah, right. This past weekend, I was up in the beautiful and delicious Napa Valley at an event called Campovello, which is basically a festival of wine, food, and bikes. So
that sounds
pretty much perfect for me and my husband. So we did Team Miyoko's for the 2-day event, and Miyoko and I also cooked on stage together on Saturday, and we made her incredible recipe, which is basically a mixture of lentils and flax seeds and nutritional yeast and spices that you can keep in just like a glass jar in the refrigerator, and then pour it into a bowl, add boiling water for 15 minutes, and then literally make any kind of meat replacement you would ever want. So meatballs, hamburgers, taco meat, hamburger meat, depending on, you either form it into a hamburger or into a meatball, and then add more spices that you might want to add. Let's say if it's an Italian dish or a Mexican dish, you'd add those spices in. So, and then of course we added Miyoko's cheese to every different dish, of course.
Maybe she'll sell that lentil delight at some point.
Yeah, it's brilliant because it's so simple and so easy, super nutritious, really high in fiber and protein and carbs and everything that athletes need. So we had a blast doing that.
So how was the cycling part?
So I'm not fast anymore. So it's a little
rough
on everyone.
No, I don't believe that.
It's a little rough on the ego. But you know what? I just decided to take a deep breath and just enjoy the beauty, because riding up there is epic. I remember training up there many, many years ago. And, so I tried to just soak that up and let the pros they just drop me like a really large rock in the very beginning, and I just let it go.
You just didn't want them to feel bad. Plus, you were too busy cooking and eating delicious Miyokos, spreading the plant-based word. So anyway, thanks for being there. All right, and thank you, our guest, for being here. So will you introduce him, Dotsie? Because
yeah, we're stoked. Okay, so our guest today is Matt Frazier. And if you can't find what you're looking for, you might as well create it yourself. And that's exactly what Matt did back in 2009 when he felt a lack of quality vegetarian resources for athletes specifically. Attempting to qualify for the Boston Marathon, which he did just 6 months later, Matt Frazier did his homework and created a blog to help other vegetarian athletes out there navigate their nutrition and achieve their best performance results. In the 10 years that have passed, that blog has evolved into a major brand, the No Meat Athlete. That includes running and triathlon training guides, a self-improvement academy, a podcast, cookbooks, and a growing community of regional chapters throughout the entire world. Pretty impressive. Matt himself has also evolved as an athlete. This is extraordinary to me. After completing several, not one, but several 50-milers and a 100-miler in 2013, he has since embraced the seasonality of fitness and tried his hand at weightlifting, soccer, and mixed martial arts. Welcome to the Switch for Good podcast, Matt. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. That was a great intro. You guys actually, know a lot of stuff about me.
Yes,
we do our research. So we read that, going back just a bit to kind of the beginning of your fit self, that you were actually drinking with friends when you decided to run the Boston Marathon. Is this the case? Because I too have made some really insane decisions, maybe in the past, while having a couple too many glasses of wine. Tell us about that decision and how it was made.
Yeah, so I think that's probably not too uncommon a story for people who decide to run. I mean, I've met a lot of people who run marathons or half marathons that they committed to after 2 or 3 beers. So this was pretty much that. It was some college friends and I who weren't runners at all. We were like into lifting weights and kind of just getting in shape as college kids do. And we said like, hey, we're running, I don't know, 2 or 3 miles at a time for this fitness program we're doing. Like, what if we could run a half marathon? That would mean then we probably are in even better shape. And then somebody said, well, why would we do that? Like, let's just do the full thing. And so then we said, okay, we're going to do that. And then it was like, well, we had to fill out the registration, and it said, what's your projected finish time? So we're like, I don't know what kind of finish time we'd want. And then we realized that you can't get into Boston Marathon, which we had tried to register for, unless you run a certain time. So I wrote that down as my projected finish time, which was like a mile pace that I could not even run for 1 mile. But I just said, well, I could probably train myself to do that. And it turned out that I was wrong about my ability to do that on the first marathon by 104 minutes. But that massive failure kind of got me really excited about like, wow, what would it mean to actually be in that kind of shape? And it kind of just set off on this journey that ended up taking like 7 years. But like you said, I did eventually get there.
You got there by qualifying under a minute within the time that you needed to qualify for, but you got there. So congratulations. And it took a lot of persistence. Weren't you sort of feeling like you were never going to get there because you got to a certain point and then you sort of hung there and you needed to figure out, okay, what can I do more or better so I can actually qualify? I think it was 10 minutes you needed to cut off your time. Is that correct? Yeah, that's right. So over like the first 6 years, I had taken off 90 minutes or something like that, 92 minutes off of my first marathon time. And, honestly, for the first time, started to doubt that I was going to make it. Because all that other time, it was just this big fantasy that didn't have much at stake. And it was kind of like, maybe that's possible, maybe it's not. But for me, it was just fun. I was like, well, who knows? And I was reading Tony Robbins' books, and I was convincing myself that this could happen. And I would write it down on paper and, record it and read it every single day that I was going to do it. And I was like just all in that mindset of certainty. But after I had, felt like I had kind of addressed what I thought were the major areas and learned how to run, learned how to stop getting injured, which was a huge problem at the beginning for me. I just found like I didn't know where the additional 10 or 12-minute improvement was going to come from. It felt like I was kind of stuck, and it felt like it might be a really long road to kind of, get there or not. But the progress had really started to slow. I think in my last marathon, I'd only taken off 2 or 3 minutes from the previous one and, had gotten injured in the process. And I just thought, I don't know if this is going to happen. But it did happen. And part of that was because you changed your diet. Yes, exactly. I had these leanings to become vegetarian. It was not vegan then because I didn't really even know what that was. Mm-hmm. I wasn't raised thinking about this stuff at all. But I had gotten a dog a few years before this, and I had just started to think about what I was eating and started to say wow, it's kind of strange that I love this dog so much, but I'm eating pigs and things like that, and not really thinking anything of it. So I got to this point where I just didn't really want to be doing that anymore. But I was terrified of doing that because I had put 5 or 6 years now into this Boston Marathon dream, and I thought for me it was well, that's impossible. You couldn't keep getting faster as a marathoner. Without eating meat, without the protein and all that stuff. So I was really afraid to do it. And for a year leading up to that, I had actually stopped eating cows and pigs, but I still kept the chicken, turkey, and fish in there, thinking I needed the protein. And that wasn't really, I wouldn't say my fitness improved as a result of that, but I was eating somewhat closer to the way I felt I wanted to be. And then I finally became convinced that this might be a good decision for my long-term health to go vegetarian. I started just kind of learning about it and realized that there'd be a lot of energy gains potentially and long-term maybe resistance to disease and illness and things like that. And I said, what, I'm just going to do this because I really want to do it. I'm tired of eating the birds and the fish. I want to be able to call myself vegetarian and do it. And that's like you said, that's when I started looking around to see if it was going to be possible or if this Boston Marathon dream of mine was going to have to kind of take a back seat. And I couldn't find anything. What I found was it just wasn't helpful at all. It didn't inspire a lot of trust. It sort of seemed like it was written by activists who maybe had lots of other reasons for wanting me to believe that this would work for me. Mm-hmm. I couldn't find anything from athletes who had done it and said, yes, this works. I mean, it existed. Scott Jurek was doing it as an ultramarathoner. He was a legend then, but it just wasn't out there. Brendan Frazier had a few books. The Thrive book, or his first book, The Thrive book, was out. But it was a Canadian publisher, and it just wasn't something that I had really just hadn't come across my radar. You can't trust them. Exactly.
That was perfect.
So
I just
what
said,
year was
there's got to be something that I would like to, what's the website that I would wish there was right now? And I said, I should just start making that. And that's what I did.
And what year was this?
This was 2009, March 2009.
Okay. So you qualified, but what I've read in your very excellent book, No Meat Athlete, is that yeah, it's very good for people who want to start, make the change, or just even become a better runner. Had great tips for running in it, cooking tips. Anyway, we'll talk about it throughout this podcast. But is that you said that you really felt that what made the difference in that 10 minutes because you accomplished your goal after turning vegetarian. You attribute it to being vegetarian, but mostly to the fact that you lost 6 pounds and not so much from the fact that you cut out meat. Is that still what you feel? Because I know your nutrition philosophy is very, it's pretty middle of the road, moderate.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that I think it's mostly because of that. When I wrote the book, I think that probably is more what I, thought I could attribute it to. But as I've learned more, I have a sense that it wasn't just that. Certainly that helps. I mean, you can go plug into a calculator how much time you will shave off a marathon if you drop, for every pound you lose, how many seconds you can expect to save. But it wouldn't be 10 minutes for me at that point. So I think that's part of it. But I think perhaps more than that is what happened when I made the switch from eating food that was essentially, lifeless and just kind of devoid of micronutrients to these fresh, whole fruits and vegetables. Because all my life, during this training, I had researched nutrition. I thought that was an important part of this. And I had kind of decided that the ideal way for me to eat would be every meal possible, eat like chicken breast and brown rice. And I thought protein, complex carbohydrate, find some way to get the fat in, and maybe some sort of vegetable makes it onto the plate or a salad gets served. But probably that's not the focus of anything. And when I made the switch to vegetarianism, and where I kind of said, I'm going to eat the way I want to eat. I'm not, if the Boston thing happens or if it doesn't work out, whatever, I'm just going to do this. I started not really thinking about how do I eat for sports. I started going to the farmer's market and saying, what is here? What new vegetable have I never cooked before? What's in season? What would be fun to make tonight? And I just started eating that way. And I started just eating all kinds of fruits and vegetables. And my plate became fruits and vegetables. Sure, there were still whole grains in there. But the third, the half of it that had used to be taken up by meat or cheese or eggs or whatever, that was replaced by foods that were much more alive. And I really do think that the anti-inflammatory nature of so many of those foods, along with the ease in digestion that kind of stuff gives you, the nutrient density, right? Lots of nutrients in a relatively small amount of calories. I really think that made a big difference because that summer I worked out, I had just, the amount of success working out that I have never had before, all kinds of gains. I kept expecting that the injury surely was just around the corner because up until then, that's how it was. If I was running great, I would inevitably push myself too hard just out of excitement. And then 3 weeks later, something would be hurting. And then that's, that would be the end of that training cycle or something. But this time it didn't happen. I held out that injury-free all the way through the race, took those last 10 minutes off my marathon. And then after that, decided to go vegan. I started to, learn about Brendan Brazier's book, learn about Rich Roll, learn about Scott Jurek, learn about all the people who were having success with this. And that's when I said, I can actually be vegan and maybe even get better results. And that's when I got into the ultra running and never got hurt, never got an injury as an ultra runner during my 100-miler. And so I guess it's kind of the growing of that body of evidence to me has made me think there's also, it's not just a weight loss thing. There's an injury resistance component that happened, a recovery component essentially. And I think that's probably why I've changed the way I think as far as what was responsible.
Mm-hmm. That really supports the profound argument that focusing on the micronutrients rather than the macronutrients really supports getting in all those plethora of phytonutrients and anti-inflammatory antioxidants, which then supports potentially, hopefully, not getting injured nearly as much as we used to when we were much more inflamed. But I wanted to go back to the spot where you talked about making the connection and with your dog. And we had Bianca Taylor on, and she said the exact same thing. She was actually sitting there sauteing chicken in the pan and looked down at her little dog in the dog's eyes and was just in that very moment made that connection. And I want to ask you what you think, I guess, kind of the differences between that connection that is made for some people and this weekend up in Napa, there were a lot of the top chefs were there cooking, all sorts of food, not non-vegan food. and one of them had a gorgeous golden retriever. And Sunday morning when we got to the event, the golden retriever was running around in between three large boxes with coals on top that were smoking whole pigs, right? The nose, the eyes, the tail, the entire pig was in there. And that obviously presents a interesting dichotomy of that love and that he clearly has, even bringing his dog to the event itself and running around freely and wanting to stay right by his owner, his love, the chef. What, in your assessment of that, what is that difference between being able, I mean, have you thought much about it? Some of us say, oh, there was just that one moment, and then some people, they just, that just never connects.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very convenient and very, very easy to choose to ignore that connection, right? Like the meat industry goes to great lengths to make sure that it is easy to do that, right? They hide lots and lots of cows in warehouses and things like that. So you don't see so much animals, and you don't make that connection is hidden. A lot of kids, though, who I've met multiple parents who say that their kid, when they learned that the chicken they were eating was the same as chickens, the same thing, that they wanted to be vegetarian. And a few of them pursued that and actually tried it, and some didn't. But it's interesting to me. It's telling that a kid can become 8 or 10 years old and not realize that chicken that they get from the fast food restaurant is chicken that is out there walking around in the grass. So I just think it's really easy to, if you choose to, you can ignore that reality that this is the same. And I think I don't know what the difference is as to those who choose and those who don't, but I know it is made very easy to just kind of remain in the dark and decide not to think about that.
Yeah,
that is all I know. I don't know. I was at the time when this happened to me, I had gotten this dog. I was reading books about consciousness and kind of, what is consciousness in humans? And to me, as I kind of learned about the explanation for what it is, the conclusion I drew was wow, we're not really that different from animals. The consciousness that in humans is maybe a little more advanced than what's in animals, but I didn't get the sense that it was fundamentally different. And for me, those kinds of ideas, it was all happening at the same time, and I think that's what had me really thinking about it. But yeah, I mean, it's quite easy not to put yourself in another person's shoes, and I think the same is with animals.
I mean, we don't even use the word chicken. We say we eat chicken, but otherwise we eat beef. We don't say we eat cow. We don't say we eat pig. We say we eat pork. So these things are, they try and muddy it.
I almost wonder if the chefs, I was really observing that this weekend, it's they fear that it would threaten their career. If they even talked about, right? And I mean, it makes sense, but then the world that we're in and the bountiful flavors and satiety and gorgeousness and fulfilling nature of the food we eat, we know that is not the case. But I think that is potentially something that seemed to be going on with a lot of the chefs this weekend.
Yeah, I'd like to know actually your food philosophy, Matt. You do talk a lot. You're very inclusive. And on your podcast and in your book about diet. And so tell me a little bit about how you recommend people eat for health overall.
So you're right. I am very inclusive. I try to be that way because one of the reasons that I took a while, like I said, I spent a year not being vegetarian, and when I kind of wanted to. And longer than that, where I was just thinking about it, I had always assumed that it was not for me. You mentioned that idea about threatening your occupation. It threatens someone's very identity. If you've been raised thinking that milk is protein, milk is good for the body, or every good parent gives their child meat. It is something that it's really deep, obviously, that connection we have with eating this way. So I don't know. I just, when I would come across that message being spread, the vegetarian message being spread, even in college or graduate school campuses, I had the sense that if I was going to do that I would need to become someone like that and become not just an activist, but the type of activist who's in your face and who's really making sure you hear this message loud and clear and telling you how you should be behaving. And that never resonated with me at all. And that was honestly one of the reasons I didn't make this change, because I didn't want to go down that path. I didn't want to be that way. So that's something I've always been really sensitive with. I just do not want my website to be interpreted as kind of the sites that I was finding when I was looking for this information as like, hey, this guy's just out here to try to change me and try to, promote his agenda. So I've always made it, very open. What would have spoken to me at that time was someone who says like, hey, this really can help you. You can do it all the way if you want, and you'll probably get the most benefits, or you can do it 90% of the way. Or if you can't imagine doing that, do it 50% of the way. And then once you're there, and I truly do believe that once you're there, you start to get your eyes open to not just the ways in which you could make it work in your life, but into some of these more, you develop a sense of compassion, and you start to get that sense of looking at the dog and saying, wow, this is kind of the same as those pigs. Mm-hmm. So because of that, I never tell people like, you should go vegan now, or you should be plant-based, or you should be 100% plant-based. As far as the science goes, what I have found is that it seems like the top doctors think if you're eating 95% of your calories from whole plants, it really doesn't matter that much where you're getting the other 5 to 10%. As far as health goes, it's not easy to see that as far as science and research says. And so that's when I talk about it, that's kind of what I say to people. I purposely try not to be one of the people who's like covering up that fact so that we can say we should be 100% plant-based and that's how it should be. And I think that when I share that message, I think that reaches people. I know it makes some, diehard vegans mad, and I get plenty of people who don't like my saying that. But I think it brings in a whole lot more people who otherwise, would shut their ears to this message. So I think you should eat mostly plants. I think if you eat 80-90% of your food from plants, I think most people will experience dramatic changes in their health. I think those plants should be whole. I don't think there's a whole lot of value in plant-based, meat alternatives, cheese alternatives. Now, Miyoko's, as you mentioned, Miyoko's actually a friend of mine. We did an Italy event that we co-hosted a couple years ago, and I love her stuff because it's made out of nuts and miso and pretty whole foods. It's not just fake like chemical cheese stuff doesn't even taste that good. It's really good whole food. So I love it for that. And so I just think sure, that stuff, if that's part of like plant-based and making the lifestyle work for you, and it is for me. Like I love the a vegan hot dog or vegan hamburger, like the Beyond Burger thing. Like once every 2 months I'll eat one of those things. Or if it's the right event, I'm at a baseball game and they happen to have that, which where I live in Asheville, that kind of thing happens a lot. There's a lot of those options. I think it's great, and it's good for kids, helps them feel included in whatever activity they're doing when there's a vegan alternative. But I don't think that's just something you should base your diet around. I think it can be a good transition food. It can be this kind of good like nostalgia food, but I don't think it really is necessarily even better than animal products as far as health goes. Mm-hmm. So I think whole plant foods is the way to do it. I think 80-90% of that for health reasons, I think that's about as great as you can do.
And if you're an ethical vegan like you now are, then the 100% is,
of course,
fills it in. But for health reasons, which as you said, most people come in. If they come in for that, they might stay for the ethical reason and expand. Your father actually was resistant at first to eating plant-based. Can you tell a story about him?
Yes, and my mother actually too recently has gone completely plant-based. Both of them, it was health scares, heart scares particularly, that finally got the message to sink in. I think for my dad, I'd been doing No Meat Athlete for like 7 years at that point. For my mom, it was 9 years, and they read my stuff. They talked to me about it. Like I said, I'm not the person who's going to go out there and like try to convince people to start eating this way. I'd rather just kind of be an example and let those who want to follow that example or learn from it, let them do it. I don't really try to go be a salesman for this diet or this lifestyle. So, I made sure they were aware of it. They made a lot of improvements to their diet. They understood the whole foods thing. But like my dad, the path that took for him was going paleo for a little while, which on one hand I was like, oh, great, you're eating way better, Dad. And then on the other hand, it was like, he would say like we'd be in a I forget what kind of trip it was, maybe a camping trip, and he saw bacon in the convenience store refrigerator. And he was like, well, that's good. And I was like, it just, I don't know. I mean, that's not even what paleo was supposed to be.
Right.
So, it took him that path, but then he had a heart issue, and I said, hey, come to this event with me where I was speaking, Remedy Food in Toronto. And he came up with me and, listened to the talks. And after like one day of that, hearing it from a scientific perspective, it resonated with me, resonates with him. He was in, and he has not really slid back at all since then. So it's been great for him, and my mom, same exact way. Oh, just so many great improvements have happened as a result of making the switch. And I'm proud of how it happened. I'm glad I didn't have to push them and say, look, this is how it is, or like cause a rift or something that would leave a bad taste in everyone's mouth. So I'm glad it worked out for me. Wouldn't for everybody. Like I realized like it's possible. What if those heart issues had been it and that was it? Maybe then I would have had a lot of regrets for not pushing this harder earlier. So I don't have an answer to that, but I am fortunate that it worked out.
What would be your maybe top 3 tips in terms of having a hopefully successful conversation with loved ones around food? Because I think it's something that we all struggle with. It's like, the convenience store owner down the street that you see every day will go vegan after one conversation with you. And then, but like your mom or dad, I have the same situation, right? Is like, although my mom and dad are 98% there too, I'm crazy proud of them. But but obviously it's much more unsettling to our hearts and souls that it's like we can't seem to get mom right away or cousin right away or sister right away. Why is the convenience store owner listening to us? It's frustrating, and but it's just the fact, right? You hear this from so many. Whole food, plant-based focused people, vegans, vegetarians, whatnot. What are some tips so that we can have just empathetic conversations, fair conversations, kind conversations, non-pushy conversations that are effective conversations?
That's a great question. I can tell you what I have done that has worked. With my dad, for example, I noticed exactly that. He wouldn't listen to me because I was so close. And I think that's a huge thing to realize is that there's this natural resistance to listening to people who you think you know so well. And something about it just seems like, well, surely they don't have the answer or they can't be an expert about this. So for my dad, I played him an interview. We actually had a long road trip, car trip. And so he was sort of captive audience. And my wife and I put on an interview from that Food Revolution Summit, which John Robbins hosts and he does with his son Ocean. But in this case, it was him interviewing Joe Furman, who was really about as science-based as they come. And I knew that would be something that my dad would be interested in. He'd hear that evidence. So that was one of them. Like if there's a way of making it not you who's the one doing the sharing, but someone who you think they will trust who's doing the sharing, that's a great thing. Not everyone's going to read a book that you hand them. But if you can find something that's really small and digestible and easy, or a situation like that where it's a podcast that they might be interested in, I think that can help a whole lot. So that way you're not the one making the argument, but someone else who I think is perhaps for some reason more trustworthy, that they can do it. I think I mentioned being an example before, but I think that goes somewhat deeper. My parents they knew that I was not going to be pushing my diet because I thought it was right. So when it came time for them to, seek out ways to help, I think they believed then at that point that when I said, look, like you're having heart problems, that's one of the biggest things this addresses. I think because I wasn't always in your face and pushing about it, I think I sort of saved up my, the trust and my chance to really say like, hey, look, this is real. So I think if you're not in their face all the time and you're just like, oh, that person who's trying to make people go vegan, I think that's going to tend to help you if you can pick your spots. I also think I see what a lot of people do is they will go vegan on social media, or they'll go vegan, then they'll get on social media the next week telling everyone they should be vegan when they haven't done it for any amount of time to like be in a position to be doing that. So what I found was that by getting more slowly into it, I spent, as I said, the first year where I didn't eat pigs or cows. Then I spent probably 2 years being vegetarian. And then finally, during that time, kind of phased out the dairy. But it was 2 years after that I actually finally said, okay, now I'm going to be vegan. Well, what getting into it in phases did for me was taught me how to talk to people about it. In addition to taught me how to plan meals, how to order at restaurants, and how to avoid all these socially awkward situations that I think so many people run into when they just kind of dive in and become vegan and then start trying to share the message everywhere and tell everyone else that they should be vegan now. I just kind of, I think, learned a certain amount of tact and kind of poise in how do you present people with the choices you're making. Like, how do you go to a party and tell them about your dietary restrictions? If you just say, hey, I'm vegan, I don't eat any of this food that you're making, that's a lot harder than saying, hey, I'm doing this thing where I'm not eating cows or pigs right now. Like, will there be some sort of chicken or a fish thing? And if not, can I bring my own thing? And so I did that for a while. And then I got to the point where it was vegetarian. And then that was somewhat harder, but still pretty easy compared to full-on vegan, much less whole food, plant-based vegan. Just to say like, hey, I have this sort of thing that I'm doing, and can I help make that happen for me? So I think in just taking my time to get into it, I think that really helped me to get better at talking to people about it. And I think that's one of the great benefits of kind of easing your way in rather than overnight saying everything changes tonight and I'm different from now on. I don't tell people not to do that. If they are inspired to go vegan overnight, I want them to try that, but I like to remind them that there is this alternative for when it, because a lot of times that doesn't work, that doesn't last. So if it fails, there's sort of this gradual, easier way in method, and I think it comes with a lot of benefits.
Mm-hmm. You talk about habit change quite a bit in your book, and I've heard you on your podcast talk about it. You have, I think it's 5 tips on how to change a habit. Can you share them with our listeners? And with Dotsie and me, we got habits we got to change too, right? Of how you recommend someone change a habit. I thought they were very, very logical and made total sense.
The small steps thing is one of the ones I really like. I think it is not the intuitive way to change. Most of us, when we want to make a change, we think, okay, well, I'll just change that. And that's how you get into the New Year's resolutions and the idea that because you're going to switch this flip this switch when the calendar changes, or when you wake up and decide, I'm never drinking another beer, or I'm never eating another animal, or whatever, right? Like, we think that somehow that's going to work, even though time and time again it fails. And then you do that enough times, you fail enough times, and then eventually what you tell yourself is not, oh, there must be a better way to change. What instead we tell ourselves is, oh, I'm not good at changing, and I'm going to give up, and I'm just going to stick with this because it's hard to change. So, like I said, I don't discourage people from trying the all-in, like, go for it method, but this alternative, take small steps, like purposely restrain yourself from changing all the way. I think that's a really, really powerful habit, and works especially well for changes that you're not all that excited about. People who want to start running, for example, if they just commit to like a half hour of running a day every day, like the first 2 times they do it, it's awful. It's miserable to go run for a half an hour. So to have to do it again and again and again just doesn't work. But if instead you said, like, I know my tendency is to try to want to go for it, and I'd like those results to happen overnight, but I'm going to like trust that doesn't work. And I've seen it fail before. So instead I'm going to go run for 1 minute, which isn't going to do anything, right? It's going to do nothing. But I'm going to try to build this 1 minute streak for a whole week. And if I can do that, then I will let myself run 3 minutes. And again, like by that second week, you're going to be wanting to go for 10 or 15 because you're into it and you had success with your streak. But if you just purposely like restrain it and stick to the schedule, I think that creates anticipation and excitement for each level, does the opposite of the burnout thing. And what happens is you don't experience any positive benefits during that initial 2 weeks or even 2 months. Nothing that you can see on the surface. Your body's not changing. You're not necessarily feeling more energetic. But what's happening is your mind is changing. And you're starting to learn that when I make a promise to myself, I actually keep it. Those promises aren't meaningless like they had been for the past 10 years when I told myself that tomorrow every single thing changes and it changes all the way. You start to rebuild that trust in yourself. And I think that belief change that starts to happen, that's a crucial thing for habit change. So that's one of them. I think it's really good to change only one thing at a time. As I mentioned, like, you get excited about changes. I know I did this all the time. I would want to change whatever, my diet or my fitness. And then with that, I'd say, well, it would probably be good if I started meditating too. And like, I may as well read for half an hour a day. So I would have this whole new plan that was starting tomorrow, and it would never work. It just wouldn't. So what I've kind of realized is that, and I don't know that how much truth there is. There's all kinds of different science that comes out about willpower and habit change. But a simple understanding that I have found helpful is the idea that when you try to change a habit, it's a race of your willpower, which is going to be depleting as you draw on it and force yourself to do things that are difficult, versus this force of habit, this habit loop that's happening in your brain. You're reinforcing this cycle that says, when this trigger occurs, I actually go do this thing. So it's a race. Is the willpower going to run out before this thing becomes habitual and therefore doesn't really require much more willpower? Or is it going to become a habit first? Well, when you're trying to change a whole bunch of habits at once, all of them are drawing on the same willpower supply. But each of them is its own habit that needs to be built. So now you're drawing on that willpower 2 or 3 times as fast with all these different habits that are trying to build before that willpower runs out. So I think having just one habit, the patience to just have one, is really, really important that you're trying to change. And that's really hard for me. Like like I said, I get excited and I want to change everything. What I started doing was making a list. I said, I'm working on this one now, but I know that on this piece of paper, in this journal or whatever, is the list of other things I want to change. So as soon as this one feels good and I'm comfortable, then I will move on to these other things. And that somehow eased the tension I felt when I thought I wasn't changing everything at once.
I like that.
So that's one. As far as like that's the big stuff, honestly. I think it's important to have little practical cues. Like so many habit failures happen when we just forget to change that. We just forget to do whatever the new habit is. So posting visual reminders, like it's one of those things that no one actually does. No one does put the sticky note up that says, take a break every minute or every hour and walk around from work. Like we just forget to do that sort of thing. So actually posting reminders really does increase the chances that you're going to stick with that habit. And that's just a general example of like the actual changes you can make in your environment that are going to force you to do this new habit, like the not buying the food that you don't want to eat. That's a huge one. If you can do things that will make it so that the default action is the one you want to enforce and encourage, that goes a long way. So there's tons of different tips for how to do that sort of thing. I know people who like go to sleep in their running clothes so that they can wake up in the morning and have one less thing they have to do, be able to sleep 2 minutes later. And, just any of those little kind of environmental things where you can make a decision when you're, in a much better state to make that decision, it's going to go a long way. So designing that environment is also really important. I'm sure those weren't the 4 out of the 5 that are in the book, though.
Those are great. Those are fantastic.
It was a bonus session right now, then. Thank you.
Now people can buy the book and learn for more.
Perfect. Exactly.
So the change in your environment, I think, is really important because the easier that you make it on yourself, the less excuses you have why why you can't do it. So planning ahead is important. I think especially when we change our diet, which means just what you said, taking all the stuff that you don't want to eat out of your house so it's not around at all and putting substitutes in visual right there in front of you. Science has shown that if something is visually there, we will be more apt to take it than something that is down or higher, a little harder to get to, or we can't see. It's amazing how many times I've forgotten that there's a chocolate bar in the back of the lower cupboard.
Oh,
I mean, truly,
really?
Yes.
Even
yes.
you.
I know, even me. So, so things like that. So that was great advice. And I really love the thing about changing only one habit at a time, because that is definitely something that on New Year's resolutions, people fail at. They aim too high and they overwhelm themselves and think, oh, it's me, when it's not them. It's the fact that they stepped in terms of making their
But I love
goals.
writing them all down. There's some sort of like release or freedom in that. Just write the whole list of 10 things and then just know that it's there and step by step. I wanted to ask you about your family. Are you raising a vegan family?
Yes.
I would imagine. I didn't want to assume, but I would imagine. So you have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old?
Actually, the 8-year-old just turned 9, and the 5-year-old will turn 6 in about a week.
Okay, they keep growing. I don't know how that happens, but
I know.
Tell me about your navigation through that. Now, obviously, they're in school, I hope, and they are interacting with their fellow classmates and their parents, and they're going to birthday parties, and they're experiencing outdoor activities and all of that. What is that like? What are some of those tips? I mean, that's a whole nother layer than just you doing it yourself with your wife.
Yes, absolutely. We talked about changing your environment, and one of the decisions we made shortly after we had our first child was to move to a place where it made, more cultural sense to eat plant-based, live the way we want to live. And that's something I know not everybody's going to go change their location so that they can more easily raise kids as eating plant-based. But if it's something that's that important to you, then it is worth considering. Is your location the right one for that? So we're lucky to live now in a place where it's really not uncommon at all. In fact, I just found out last week that my son's class of 20 kids, and this is a public school. It's like a charter school, but it's public. There's no exclusion of people, or it doesn't cost any money. 5 of the 20 kids eat vegan diets out of 20. Maybe one of them is like dairy-free, not vegan or something. But that's just a huge number. That is, I had no idea. I thought it was him and maybe one other. Yeah. So it's quite typical here, and almost all the time. Like at a birthday party, they're going to have things that are vegan options, or at least be kind of mindful of it. And if they don't, they'll tell us ahead of time. We kind of like, so this is also another controversial one, but like I don't want my kids to never have tried animal products, because I think if they don't, that when they reach a certain age, they're going to say, you know, the inevitable rebellion is going to happen, and they're going to want to, just because we wouldn't let them do that. So, you know, I'm very open-minded, and we tell the kids all the time, like, look, if you want to do this, we're not making you be this way. You can, like, of course, this is what we're cooking in the house. This is what we're going to buy when we're out. But, like, you know, when you're out, if you want to do the non-vegan thing, it is okay. We're not going to make you do anything. And we just talk about it all the time. But they, you know, they know that it's part of my identity. I mean, they've seen that, they know about the No Meat Athlete books. They wear the No Meat Athlete t-shirts. We talk to them all the time about our food and our, you know, how we feel about animals and zoos and things like that. And they help in the garden, and all the time we remind them about why this food is so healthy, and, you know, why we love animals but don't eat them. But none of that comes with, and you should be vegan then. We just talk about it. So I think that has helped tremendously. Just that it just adds a bit of ease to it. Because I think if there's this panic that when the kid goes to a birthday party and he's out of sight, what's he going to do? That to me just adds like a whole layer of weirdness to the vegan thing, and I don't want that. So we always we just send them along with a vegan cupcake or something from Whole Foods. Again, junk food for sure, but that's what birthday cake is. So they always have that option. Or we tell them, if there's not going to be something, we'll say, like, look, if you don't want to do that, then like we'll just go get ice cream after this, or we'll go do whatever. And as far as I know, they've never done the non-vegan thing. They just that's fine. And if they did, I'd be fine with it. Like, I guess I really do not want to like make the decision for them.
So at Halloween, do they go trick-or-treating and then give you substitute or something? What do you do at Halloween?
Yeah, you know, it's fine. Like, I don't remember what we did in the first few, but nowadays they just sort through. They find the vegan ones. They ask us which ones are vegan, and then the rest of them they'll just give away to friends, or the dentist will buy back candy, which they'll buy back any kind of candy, even the vegan kind.
Wow.
And so the kids will do that. And then, honestly, like, if I don't know, do you guys have kids?
No.
Okay, so like ours,
we're asking for our listeners.
I mean, ours will. They just don't want that much candy. Like, they like it. But when I think about what I did on Halloween when I was a kid, I would eat, and every kid does it, pounds and pounds of candy within the next week. Like, it's crazy. And it's not really, it shouldn't be at all surprising that the kids will eat like 3 or 4 pieces of the candy that night, or maybe more. But then the next day, they'll eat half that much. And then the next day, they might have 1 piece. And then even the vegan candy just kind of sits there after that. And then eventually we get rid of that too. So
wow.
I don't know. Like,
yeah, you've raised extraordinary kids.
Yeah,
I don't know many kids like
either.
that unless they sort of don't like sugar. But it sounds like your kids have more of an awareness of food. I never thought about it. Food was just something to make me,
And they have different taste buds because they're
that's true. That's true.
The taste buds for sure do change, and I know that for sure because my daughter, we were like much more into the Whole Foods thing. In fact, we were vegetarian when we first had my son. Still drinking cow's milk and things like that. But we just, we gave him plenty of the fake meat, fried Gardein chicken fingers, whatever they're made out of. Mm-hmm. And he kind of still has a little bit of a palate for that stuff. My daughter, for her dinner, will be like a pile of beans over here, a pile of broccoli over here, and maybe some pasta over here, just plain pasta. She doesn't want things mixed together, and she doesn't want any extra stuff. She doesn't want anything that's intensely sweet or salty or anything. And I really do think that happens if that's how they're, especially, and it might be that sort of thing where, like, if you didn't do it at the beginning, you kind of missed the boat on some of it, but certainly taste buds can change in adults even. Our need to have salt, for example, can change in just a few weeks of having a lower salt diet. But I do think the mindset is the bigger thing. It just, my daughter's 5, as I said, she and I will make pasta all the time together. Like most Sundays, she and I will make some sort of pasta meal, like from scratch, just handmade pasta. And we talk about each ingredient and where it comes from and what it is. And she just has this awareness of food that I never, ever had as a kid, like where it comes from, what it is, why we eat it or why we don't eat it. So I think that's a huge part of it. But I don't think it's hopeless. Like I said, I think there is that window when they're just starting out in those first 2 years. But I really think you can kind of change that food culture in your house and maybe not get to the kids where the point where mine are, where they don't eat the Halloween candy after 4 or 5 days. But I do think it can change for sure. I don't think it's like this thing where it's all or nothing.
The questions with kids and how healthy, if they can be healthy on a vegan diet, come up also with athletes. Can they be healthy on a vegan diet?
Sure.
And they want to know if they should try to get more protein or more iron. And you talk about that in your book, which I love. So can you tell people who are listening here why you don't think they need to worry?
Yes, definitely. I think so. With the kids thing, like I'm really glad you brought that up. Like people talk about, aren't you worried? Like, don't you have to be really careful on this vegan diet with them?
Yeah.
And I'm like, but we don't go to McDonald's. Like McDonald's is not an option for us. Like, don't you have to be careful if you go to McDonald's, if that's an option for you once a week or twice a week or more for a lot of families, unfortunately. I mean, I feel like you have to be somewhat less careful when your food is real, actual food that comes from the ground. And I mean, you could have animal products in your diet and still eat this mostly whole food diet. In that case, I guess my argument doesn't apply. But compared to most people who are eating this junk processed food, like I feel like we need to be less careful. Make sure they get B12, a few other little nutrients that we do try to make sure they get. But other than that, I'm sort of we're going with it, and we of course they get their tests and they get iron levels checked and they get all that stuff checked. So I'm not at all advocating for just let it go and don't even look at it, of course. But I don't think there's this, automatic need to be much more careful because you eat a vegan diet than because you eat a standard American diet. As far as athletes go, I think to some extent that argument still applies, right? Like I said, I wasn't trying to get all these new micronutrients from my food and eat in a much different way. I was just trying to still, follow these same calorie numbers because I thought it was all about the macronutrients. I thought it mattered for the protein, carbs, and fat. So I was trying to do that in my I wasn't being careful. I was just trying to kind of get the same ratio. Suddenly I was getting all this extra great stuff that came when I ate fruits and vegetables for the first time really ever. So yeah, I don't know. I get all these people who ask me things like, before they try a plant-based diet, they want to say, are you sure this won't happen and that this won't happen? And like, what if this? And how do you make sure you... And when I say like, just try it. Like you're not going to die because you started eating a plant-based diet or eased your way into eating plant-based and, kept your half marathons and marathon habit up. If things aren't working, you'll notice and you'll see that something's not right. And then at that point, you could either go back and say, well, that didn't work, or you could dig deeper and say, what about my diet is different? What am I no longer getting? Am I getting 30% less calories because I replaced the calorie dense animal foods with, salad? Or is it an iron thing? Like, do I have symptoms that might be related to that? Or can a blood test show me that something I forgot to take B12 and that is actually catching up with me now? Any of that stuff. So I tend not to think that we should be overthinking those things before we try them on a little personal basis. Now, if you're a professional athlete or, have serious career aspirations in athletics, maybe that doesn't apply. But honestly, that's just not who I am really talking to when I, write a No Meat Athlete post or talk on the podcast. We talk to casual recreational athletes like myself. And, a lot of people, I would say way more than not, tend to have a lot of success that comes probably because of you start eating nutrient-dense foods and not calorically dense foods. So, those things, I'm not at all to say that like iron cannot become a problem. Maybe it could. But I think it's something like if you approach this in like I'm here to learn and discover what's going on and adapt because I'm committed to eating this way, or because I'm committed to getting the best performance I can, and I think a plant-based diet offers that, but I need to figure out how to handle the iron thing, or I need to make sure I get B12, or I need to make sure those omega-3s, I still get those. I don't know. I think you can approach it scientifically and not say like I'm making a decision now that everything hinges upon, and if it works, then great, but if it doesn't, then I guess I'm not going to be an athlete anymore.
Or I guess I'm not going to be plant-based because we can easily move within the plant-based sphere and get everything we need. What you say in your book, too, is that if you eat enough calories and you're eating whole foods that are plants, you will get enough
protein and iron.
And if you're not, then you'll supplement. But it's unusual. And you're just as likely to have issues eating meat,
I think one of the beauties of it, too, is it really, eating this way, especially when you initially first switch over, whether slow or fast, is it starts to teach you to really be connected and listen to your body. And when I was switching over, I was in the midst of being a professional athlete and a few years out from Olympics, and I was so in tune with my body that it was very easy, and I almost knew instinctually that now the volume was going to have to increase. Now, where were the iron-rich foods? And I would get the blood work just to check myself. But that is something that professional athletes have, is just a really intrinsic, in tune sense with their bodies. And it's a lovely journey to go on when you start eating this way, to be more connected, because we're not that connected when we just eat whatever, whenever, however, like go through the drive-through, or it keeps you very disconnected from your body. So I love that kind of that route that it takes you on in that aspect as well.
There's also, I mean, these days there's so much data that we do have about, and like you can actually see performance changing because we're actually measuring so many things now. With heart rate and heart rate variability, and you can measure recovery. And in fact, some of the people I've talked to, some of the pro athletes, there's a guy named Baggio Husidic who plays for the LA Galaxy in MLS. He's a midfielder for them, and he said when he went plant-based, like in soccer, they track all kinds of metrics, and the amount that you're running and how fast your body's recovering, not just within a game, but like after a game and before the next training. And he said he just clearly could see his numbers improve drastically when he started eating plant-based diets, or a plant-based diet, and that's how he got some of his other people to start thinking about it. But it's something that it can be measured now, and I think you're right. Like there's definitely that, just like with how the sense of compassion kind of comes as you start to think about what you eat. You can learn a whole lot, even if that's all you did was learn a whole lot about how to listen to your body and watch it respond to different things. I think there's so much value in that. Like I'm a big time experimenter, and that's probably why I say things like, well, just try it and see what happens, and then make the adjustment.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Well, you've given us so much information. We really appreciate it. And thank you for the brand No Meat Athlete and all the work that you're doing around the world, educating people about how great it is to be plant-based and that you can be super active, just like Dotsie. He's got sort of the same message as you, Dotsie, as an athlete, that you can be super active and healthy and even recover faster on a whole foods plant-based diet. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah. Tell everyone where they can find you too, just on social media, for those that don't know.
Yes. So pretty much everything's at nomeatathlete.com. Our podcast is called No Meat Athlete Radio. No Meat Athlete on Facebook. I think on Instagram it's nomeatathlete_official, because we were a little late on Instagram, but
okay.
What are you gonna do?
All right. We'll find you there. Brilliant. This was really great. Thanks so much.
Thank you. My pleasure. This is fun.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list, where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.